Hey everyone, thank you for joining me for another YouTube video today. Um, Probably will have an update about my health here on the channel because I don't know how much it's really going to affect my channel, but we'll probably wait and see what happens with that. But I do appreciate you um, sticking by and continuing to watch these videos. Um, my understanding is that we will also have the return of the Retro Rewind starting on Sunday. I think that'll be very interesting to do. I'm looking forward to doing that, and hopefully you want too. Got a couple of ideas of maybe what to talk about, including what we're going to talk about in this video, probably. Um, but yeah, let's go ahead and get into today's topic, just because I don't feel like wasting a whole lot of time with this video today, because it seems kind of silly, and you already know from the title card and from the title of the video, obviously. But we're going to talk about this idea that the Switch 2 won't be backwards compatible, which to me is just ludicrous. Um, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Yes, Nintendo has done it in the past before. More importantly, with different leaps, I guess is what you could say. Like going from the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo, it was just kind of expected. Companies didn't really do the whole backwards compatible thing back then. You just sort of got used to the idea of new controller and new games. You know, it wasn't until we started getting into the disc generation, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, where we kind of had this idea of, PlayStation 2 should play PlayStation 1 games, etc., etc. And as long as Nintendo was doing discs, they were backwards compatible. The Wii did GameCube, and the Wii U did Wii games. It wasn't until they switched over to cartridges that they decided, well, you obviously can't bring over Wii U games because there's no disc slot. But if you look at Nintendo's history, okay, and this is something that we're going to sort of break down a little bit more as we go along. But if you look at Nintendo's history, they're not really notorious for abandoning their last generations. Especially when it's the same type. Because if you look at the Game Boy, well, there wasn't any Game Boy before that, but the Game Boy Advance could play regular Game Boy games and regular Game Boy Color games. The DS, the first generation of the DS, was backwards compatible to Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. And the 3DS, even though it didn't have the slot anymore for the Game Boy games, it was still backwards compatible to DS. And truthfully, if Nintendo had put in a slot for the 3DS, it wasn't for the fact that they didn't have a dual screen system, and they didn't have any way to really sort of figure out this is how we're going to do backwards compatibility. They really just kind of just threw everything out the door. Like the Wii U was such a failure of a selling system that they decided, you know what, we're not going to continue with the Wii name anymore. We're dropping the Wii remotes. We're starting fresh with the Switch. But now they've got a hit on their hands with the Switch. So I wouldn't think that they would do anything close to the idea of use a higher cartridge, like a 32 gigabyte or 64 gigabyte or however many gigabytes they want to have in their cartridge to hold the game, and it reads the same cartridges. I mean, why wouldn't you? Even if they make a smaller slot on the bottom of the new Switch that reads Switch games, kind of like what they did again with generations before them, where the DS had its game slot on the top and the Game Boy had its game slot on the bottom, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't be backwards compatible. I know that there's different reasons that are thrown out there, especially Modern Vintage Gamer in his recent video. I know that's been brought up a lot with a lot of YouTubers. I've seen it in a comment. I've seen it in comments of other videos. I've seen it everywhere. I don't 100% believe it. I mean, he's a game developer, so you kind of have to trust his opinion a little bit more. But at the same time, supposedly the PS3 was very hard to emulate also, but we have emulation for it on PC, and we have emulation for it now with the PlayStation Plus service. So there's obviously a way to do it. And if we already have emulation going on for Game Boy games, Game Boy Advance games, and all that stuff, why wouldn't they be able to emulate Switch games? Even if it's just digital games. Maybe they say, well, there's no way we can do physical games, but your digital ones should be able to come over. I mean, what kind of architecture would they be able to use outside of just a whole new architecture altogether? I mean, if you're looking at the same ARM processor, the same whatever that they use now, but just a more capable one from NVIDIA, why wouldn't they? It's not like they're going from PC architecture like they did before to a new architecture. They keep essentially the same architecture, a more powerful chip. So why wouldn't it be able to understand Switch games? At least that's how I look at it. I see it as it would be something that they would be able to understand Switch games for. And we know from Nintendo's own words that it's very important for them to continue to keep the people that they have. They don't want to just jump off a cliff and everybody start over again. It's important for them to keep the Nintendo accounts that they have. Best way to do that is to continue to offer everything that you offer on the Switch. Continue to offer NSO, continue to offer, the game trials, continue to offer all the stuff that they offer, but just take it to the next level. So, I think it is going to be backwards compatible. Because that's like basically saying, hey, yeah, that Xbox One, its architecture was so different from the Series X. There's no way we could emulate, it does play every single generation. Xbox 360, Xbox One, it does all the generations. But they all had different... You see what I'm saying? Same thing with the PS5 is enigmatic in that way because that's just Sony not wanting to really do it. But even if you look at PlayStation Plus, it does PS4, PS3, PS2, PS... There's a way to do it. There's a way to do it. Even if it has to take a physical game and read it like you verified, like you do now with physical games, where you just stick in the disc, it verifies that you own it, and it gives you a download version of it that then upscales it to whatever the next... I'm hoping it's 4K, but let's just assume it's 1330 or something. Even if it upscales it from a 720 image on the Switch when it's undocked up to a 1080 image when it's undocked, and it makes it run at a solid frame rate, that's still upscaling it. Even the PS5 does PS4. The PS4 didn't do PS3. If anything, Sony is the one that isn't really known for doing backwards compatibility. Xbox and Nintendo typically do because I just named those consoles. Yeah, I mean, back when they were, again, doing cartridge to cartridge, and that was kind of the thing back then, that was kind of expected. I mean, Sega did it. Everybody kind of did it. You just kind of went to the next system. Even from the Sega CD to the Saturn, it was just new games, completely different controller, different everything. But now we're in a different generation now, to where it kind of feels like that's not needed anymore. And if you also, again, look at Nintendo's histories with portables, because the Switch is more or less a portable that you can just dock and play on the TV. If you look at the history of portables, every single one of the portables has been backwards compatible. At least with the last generation. At least with the last generation. Now, the DS was full backwards. It used Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games. But the 3DS did DS. The Switch, again, is the odd man out because they completely were dropping the dual screen thing. They were completely dropping the touch controls. They were completely dropping the Wii name and wanting to start over fresh. But now they've got a hit on their hands. I don't see why they wouldn't continue with the Switch name. And I don't see why they wouldn't continue to have the Switch compatibility. Because it wouldn't make any sense, especially if we do get a console at the end of this year. Like, let's just think about this logically. We get a console at the end of this year, and possibly one of your biggest games, Tears of the Kingdom, doesn't play on this new system. that's not going to be a very good adoption rate, you know? And again, it makes sense why it worked for the Wii U because you're going from discs to cartridges. But unless they go back to discs, which would make it a home console again, they're not going to keep cartridges. And if they keep cartridges, I just don't see why there wouldn't be, unless, again, there's just some weird new architecture in the system, some weird new die in the chip that just, it can't understand the idea of it. You know, even if they have to go so far as to do like what Wii U did and just completely put, you know, a completely separate, like they put the Wii basically inside the Wii U to where it had to reboot and go into Wii mode, but it did Wii games. Even if they have to do that to where it's like, hey, this thing boots up from Switch 2 to Switch 1, gives you the same UI and you play those games, that's still fine. It's still backwards compatible. But I just think that with digital games, it's a no-brainer. It's going to obviously be backwards compatible. And I think that's going to continue to use the same cartridge type. Even if it's a new cartridge, I think that they'll put a spot somewhere for the old ones to go. Because it's just a no-brainer. It makes sense to keep those games valuable. Especially because Nintendo doesn't knock down the price of their games. Not very often. So it makes sense for them to continue to keep those games viable. Why is this game still $60? Well, you can still play it on modern day consoles. Give new life to those that maybe, you know, they want to experience Breath of the Wild for the first time before they, you know, try Tears of the Kingdom. So get it on a new console and get Breath of the Wild and a new experience now with 1080p on the go and 4K 60 frames a second when it's docked or however it is they're going to do it. Yeah, get people excited for it. So those are my thoughts. You're welcome to put your thoughts down in the comments below because maybe I'm completely overthinking or maybe I'm underthinking, I guess, and not considering, you know, all the little workings in this, that, the other, because I'm not an engineer, obviously, because look at what I do. But I don't design hardware and I don't work on software, so maybe I'm missing something somewhere. But it just seems to me like, hey, if you can get these systems, right, that before had issues with backwards compatibility, like PS3 didn't do it, even though you could put PS1 games in there, and if you get the original PS3, it could do it, but the newer ones couldn't. And the PS4 couldn't do it, but now the PS5 can do it. And even the Series S, which is kind of a, you know, low-range console in terms of what we have nowadays with PC and everything, if it can do it, even though it's digital, because again, there's no disc slot, then I can't imagine why. Unless Nintendo is just basically telling us that, yes, this is not backwards compatible because it's only digital, there's going to be no slot for a card, well, then that makes sense. But it still should play digital games. So, I don't think that they're going to do it. I mean, truthfully, I wanted to wrap this up 3 minutes ago, but it just doesn't make much sense business-wise to do it. All their consoles in the past, at least as far as the portable goes, has been backwards compatible, other than the Switch, because it was just, again, they dropped the dual screen. If they had a dual screen, I can imagine they would have done it. They would have made it work with 3DS. And yeah, it's how it is nowadays, you know? I know Nintendo does what Nintendo does, and they play by their own band, but it just makes business sense. And if the Series S can do it, and you get a console that supposedly, according to rumors, is probably going to be at least a PS4 in scale, there's no reason why it can't be backwards compatible. But that's just my 2 cents on the topic. Again, feel free to leave your comments down below, because maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm completely underthinking it and just too simple-minded on it. But I'd like to hear what you have to say, and if it does go through, I hope that you join me when we talk on the Retro Rewind, which will hopefully go up Sunday the same day, if not by Monday. But I'll catch you next time, guys. Have a good one.